I thought I'd just make a video this week for the members or anyone. Just going to look at hip flexion. So when we're trying to flex our knee up here, which we need for running, we need for squatting, sitting on the toilet, lunging, and things like that. So I thought I'd just break it down a little bit. Are you a sort of person that can't get into a deep squat? Do you struggle with a little bit of pain in the SI joint, which is around about here? And these are just some go-tos for mobility. If you don't get a chance, if the coach doesn't get a chance to go through it in the class, watch this video, do a couple of them if you get here early, if that's your troublesome area. And this is like a little bit of a go-to video. So hip flexion is just my hip flexing up to here. The muscles are mainly the deep rotators of the hip. The adductor magnus, which is like this big, that's the third biggest muscle, goes on the inside of your leg up to the bottom of your pelvis. So it's a super strong muscle that stuffs up a lot of things. And then your hip flexors indirectly, it's your hip flexors. Our hip flexor just gets a little bit tight and doesn't enable us to slide the joint very well. Those are the muscles, and something that we forget about is a lot of the stiffness is actually in the joint. If you spend a lot of time on the joint, then that's probably going to make it easier when you get back to the muscles. I find with most of the stuff that we fix, once we fix the joint issues, the muscle stuff sort of realigns itself. I'll show you that in a second. This is probably a bit out of our scope, but there's one of the main nerves, the sciatic nerve. I don't even know if I spelled that properly. But that can get caught up in the whole hip flexion thing. Cool. So I'm just going to go over a few things. One, when this bone comes up through here, you can see the top of our hip. As it flexes, a lot of us, the head of the femur is actually stuck at the front of our pelvis. Why? Is because we freaking sit a lot, so we're sitting a lot. That femur head sort of just pushes forward and it gets stuck up and in. So it's sort of superior and sort of more medial. So that's why we need to really clear our hips. So if I was on the bed here, if I'm here, if that joint doesn't roll in the socket, you have a really hard time trying to get that knee up. And sometimes it's not even muscular. So my go-to is here. You put your leg in here, get the band all the way up into your groin. Put your hands on the ground, band the leg in front, ever so slightly in front of the other. And what I do is I just lift my hips up and get the band to pull that bone back down. Cool. So I'm just going to flex off. If I can, try and straighten my leg out. For some people, that is a big struggle. They're just like here, they can't even bend. Cool. The other side. All the way up the hip, hands on the ground, banded leg in front. Try and flex the leg and make the bone try and drop back in the capsule into the middle of the socket. So that's really handy. You can just retest it off. Can my knee get above my belly button? This one's a little bit better. The other one is trying to open up the front of my hips indirectly, the hip flexor. Two big steps down. Then what happens on this stretch is we just need to open up the front of our hips. A lot of the times people can't keep their butt on, so basically when they're stretching, they're just like hyperextending their spine. So what you want to do is posterior tilt, or just pull your pelvis back, or just squeeze your butt hard. As you squeeze your butt hard and you've got pelvis going backwards, then you start stretching forward, and you'll just feel that stretch in the front of your hips. And just gives the femur, the head of the femur, just a chance to roll and slide and glide in the socket. Cool, because this is obviously not hip flexion, it's hip extension. So people are like, why am I stretching that when my leg's got to go the other direction? Cool, but it just lets the bone slide in the joint indirectly. Cool. So those two are really good. Then we've got the deep, that's the joint. Then we're going to hit the muscles. So you're going to grab a ball, sit on a hard surface, and you're going to try and get that big adductor and right up more like posterior, like right at the back. You're going to sit on a ball and try and get it up in the area that probably no one else can go. And you're just going to try and get up like near the head of the femur, at the back of the capsule. Just going to find a really tight spot back there, and that is ouch. Now you can just put some rotation in with the leg rather than flexion extension. You can internally, externally rotate the leg. If you have a lot of, I was just saying before, if you have a lot of pain here, this is really handy, because that adductor, that big groin muscle, really tugs on the bottom of your pelvis. Cool, so that's that. And those are probably the three main ones. So you need to get the hip capsule moving, you need to open up. After you've opened that up, open up the hip flexor when you're facing forward. The hip capsule is the one where we have our hands on the ground. Rotators of the hip, we did the adductor, but the rotators of the hip is pretty much in the same section. This is the last part. My go-to is like sitting on the ball. Make sure you're not sitting on any nerves. I always cross the leg over, so it's on my left-hand side, I cross my left over my right. And I try and just search out a little bit of deepness. Got a little bit of a piriformis in there, but I find the piriformis is tighter as you go round to the trochanter, or the outside of that femur. So that's really go-to. So if you're struggling to get your knee to your chest, make sure the bone can glide in the hip first, then hit the hip flexors, hit the adductors, and all the deep rotators around the hip. That should help get you squatting deeper and take a little bit of pain in your lower back.